You already know the story. An elderly woman buys a cup of coffee, spills it in her own lap, sues for millions, and walks away rich off someone else's clumsiness. It's the joke late-night hosts have leaned on for 30 years. It's the case politicians reach for whenever they want to argue that the legal system has lost its mind. It even shows up in an episode of Seinfeld. There is just one problem. Almost none of the version you know is true. The real case has a name, Liebeck vs. McDonald's restaurants, a case number, a courtroom in Bernalillo County, New Mexico sworn testimony, medical records, and a jury verdict that legal scholars are still writing about 3 decades later. And when you go back to that record, not the jokes, not the talk radio retelling, the actual transcript, something strange happens. The joke stops being funny. And a case the world was taught to mock starts looking like the legal system, doing almost exactly what it was designed to do. This is what the McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit actually got right. February 27, 1992. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Stella Liebeck was 79 years old, a retired department store clerk, sitting in the passenger seat of her grandson's 1989 Ford Probe. They had just come through the drive-thru of a local McDonald's, where Liebeck had ordered a single cup of coffee, priced at 49 cents. Her grandson pulled the car forward and stopped so she could add cream and sugar. The Probe had no cup holder, so Liebeck did something almost anyone in her position would have done without a second thought. She braced the cup between her knees and pulled the far side of the lid toward herself to open it. The entire cup emptied into her lap. She was wearing cotton sweatpants, and the fabric did something bearskin would not have done. It soaked up the coffee and held it there, pressed against her body far longer than a simple splash would ever last. In those seconds, the liquid did what coffee at a normal home-brewed temperature cannot do. It burned through the surface of her skin and into the tissue beneath it. This is the detail the popular version of the story almost always leaves out. Stella Liebeck was not driving. The car was not moving. She was sitting still in a parked vehicle, doing something people do at drive-thrus every single day all over the world. This is usually where the joke version of the story ends, with the spill. The real story was only beginning. At the hospital, a vascular surgeon examined the damage and classified it. 3rd degree, full-thickness burns across 6% of Liebeck's body, concentrated on her groin, inner thighs, and buttocks, with 2nd-degree burns extending the total affected area to 16% of her body. 3rd-degree burns are not redness. They are not blisters. They mean the destruction of every layer of skin, and in the worst spots, damage reaching down into the fat and muscle underneath. Liebeck spent 8 days in the hospital. Her treatment included skin grafting, taking healthy skin from elsewhere on her body to close the wounds, along with repeated whirlpool therapy and debridement, procedures used to clean the wounds and clear away dead and damaged tissue before grafting could proceed. During that single hospital stay, she lost 20 pounds, nearly a fifth of her body weight, leaving her at just 83 pounds. Her full recovery stretched on for 2 more years. None of this is disputed. It sits in the medical record, in the court's own findings, and was later confirmed on camera by her own daughter and the people who treated her. This was the injury sitting underneath 30 years of punchlines. Here is what the popular version leaves out entirely. Stella Liebeck did not want to sue anyone. Her medical bills alone had already reached roughly $10,000, with further treatment still ahead of her. So she did the ordinary thing first. She contacted McDonald's directly and asked the company for $20,000 to cover her medical costs and related lost income. McDonald's answer was an offer of $800, not $800,000, $800, to a 79-year-old woman with 3rd-degree burns across a sixth of her body. That was roughly 4% of what she had asked for. Only after that response did Liebeck retain an attorney. This lawsuit did not begin as an attempt to get rich. It began as a woman trying to get her hospital bills paid, and a multi-billion-dollar corporation deciding that request wasn't worth $800. The attorney Liebeck hired, Righ Morgan, was not encountering this exact issue for the first time. 6 years earlier, he had represented a different burn victim in Houston, and during that case he had coffee temperatures tested at 18 competing restaurant chains and 20 separate McDonald's locations. McDonald's accounted for 9 of the 12 hottest readings on record. In that same earlier case, he had already deposed a McDonald's quality assurance manager named Christopher Appleton, who acknowledged the company knew its coffee ran unusually hot and had no plans to change it. By the time Liebeck's case reached the Second Judicial District Court of Bernalillo County in 1993, filed as case number CV93-02419, that same pattern resurfaced, except now the evidence went much further. During discovery, McDonald's own internal records showed more than 700 burn complaints filed against the company between 1982 and 1992 alone. Some involved children, some involved third-degree burns similar to Liebeck's own. The company had already paid out more than $500,000 settling earlier claims without ever lowering its serving temperature. At trial, Appleton took the stand again. Under oath, he confirmed that McDonald's corporate policy required franchises to hold brewed coffee at 185 degrees Fahrenheit, plus or minus 5 degrees, roughly 20 to 30 degrees hotter than most competitors served theirs. He testified that a burn hazard exists in any food or beverage served above 140 degrees, and he acknowledged that McDonald's coffee, at the temperature it reached customers, was not fit for immediate consumption. He admitted the company had never consulted a single burn specialist before setting that number, and when asked whether McDonald's intended to change anything in response to more than 700 injury reports, he answered, quote, "There are more serious dangers in restaurants." Plaintiff's expert Dr. Charles Baxter, a burn specialist, then explained the science behind exactly why that temperature mattered so much. Coffee at 190 degrees, he testified, can cause a third-degree burn in roughly 3 seconds. At 180 degrees, that window stretches to somewhere around 12 to 15 seconds. At 160 degrees, still hot, still capable of causing injury, it takes closer to 20 seconds. 20 seconds is enough time to feel the heat and pull away before the worst of the damage is done. McDonald's coffee gave the people it served almost none of that margin. Dr. Baxter also testified that this danger fell hardest on people over the age of 65, whose skin is thinner and slower to heal, making severe burns and complications significantly more likely at exactly the temperatures McDonald's was serving. Liebeck was 79. McDonald's did mount a defense. A human factors engineer testified for the company that, measured against the billions of cups of coffee it sold every year, 700 burn complaints amounted to a statistically insignificant number. On its own terms, it was a technically accurate point. But to a jury weighing a known preventable hazard against a company that had chosen not to act on it, that argument did not land the way McDonald's needed it to. The trial lasted 7 days. A 12-person jury heard the testimony, reviewed the medical photographs of Liebeck's injuries, and on August 18, 1994, reached its verdict after roughly 4 hours of deliberation. They found McDonald's 80% responsible for what happened, and Liebeck 20% responsible for the spill itself. That split matters. This was not a jury handing over a blank check. It was 12 people doing precisely what juries exist to do, weighing shared responsibility and dividing it accordingly. They awarded $200,000 in compensatory damages, reduced to $160,000 to reflect her share of the fault. Then came the number that made headlines everywhere, $2.7 million in punitive damages. That figure was not pulled from thin air. According to reporting from the time, McDonald's earned an estimated $1.35 million a day from coffee sales alone. The jury's punitive award worked out to almost exactly 2 days of that revenue, a deliberate, calculated message rather than a random windfall. One juror later explained the panel's thinking in the 2011 documentary Hot Coffee, describing it simply as, quote, "so easy to burn at that temperature." Multiple jurors interviewed afterward echoed the same idea. The case, in the end, came down to how little the company seemed to care about the people its coffee had already burned. It is also worth correcting one more detail here. McDonald's coffee cups did carry a printed warning at the time. The jury simply found the print too small and too easy to overlook, to count as an adequate warning under the law. The story does not end at the verdict, and this is where the popular myth gets things backwards all over again. Judge Robert H. Scott reviewed the jury's punitive award and reduced it from $2.7 million down to $480,000, 3 times the compensatory amount. bringing the total judgment to $640,000. Even while cutting the number down, Judge Scott described McDonald's conduct as, quote, willful, wanton, and reckless. Liebeck's side appealed that reduction and lost. Before any further appeal could be heard, the two sides reached a private settlement. The exact amount was never made public, and it remains unknown today. Contemporary news reports at the time estimated it fell somewhere under $600,000, a fraction of the multi-million-dollar figure the public still associates with this case. By the time that settlement was finalized, the story had already escaped the courtroom entirely. Early news coverage led overwhelmingly with the original $2.7 million jury figure, not the reduced and eventually settled amount. That number, stripped of the context around it, is the one that stuck in public memory. From there, the story took on a life entirely of its own. Late-night hosts turned it into a running joke. An episode of Seinfeld built a plotline around it. Political speeches cited it as proof that lawsuits in America had spiraled out of control. ABC News would later describe the case itself as, quote, the poster child of excessive lawsuits. An entire annual list of mocking, and often outright fabricated, ridiculous lawsuit stories, known as the Stella Awards, was named directly after her, despite her own case being anything but frivolous. Not every legal voice agreed with the caricature. Legal scholar Jonathan Turley described the very same case in his own words as, quote, a meaningful and worthy lawsuit. That assessment rarely made it into the punchline version. Throughout the 1990s, tort reform advocates used the headline dollar figure, never the medical record, never the 700 prior complaints, never the reduced settlement, to argue for capping lawsuit damages nationwide. It would take nearly 2 decades, and a 2011 HBO documentary titled Hot Coffee, directed by former attorney Susan Saladoff, for a wider audience to encounter the parts of the story that never fit the joke. The burn photographs, the internal complaint records, and the sworn testimony of the company's own quality assurance manager. By then, the caricature had already outlived the case it was supposedly based on. Decades later, the case is still taught in law schools and cited in casebooks on product liability and punitive damages, not as an example of a system run amok, but as a study in how a company's own sworn testimony, laid bare in open court, can look nothing like the story that reaches the public afterward. Let's run through the myth one piece at a time, against what the record actually shows. Myth: Stella Liebeck was driving when she spilled the coffee. Record: she was a passenger in a car that had already come to a stop. Myth: her injuries were minor. Record: third-degree burns across 6% of her body, an 8-day hospitalization, and skin grafting. Myth: she sued for millions right from the start. Record: she first asked McDonald's for $20,000 to cover medical costs and was offered $800. Myth: this was a freak, isolated accident. Record: McDonald's had logged more than 700 prior burn complaints in the preceding decade alone, and had already paid out over $500,000 settling some of them. Myth: the jury handed her a blank check. Record: they found her 20% at fault and reduced her compensation to match. Myth: she walked away with millions of dollars. Record: a judge cut the punitive award by more than 80%, and the two sides ultimately settled privately for an undisclosed sum reported at the time to be under $600,000. Every correction above traces back to the trial record, the judge's own rulings, or contemporaneous news reporting, not speculation, and not spin from either side of the debate. So, what did this case actually get right? It got the fault-finding right. The jury did not let Liebeck off the hook for her own role in the spill. They assigned her 20% of the responsibility and reduced her award to match it. That is not a system spinning out of control. That is basic working accountability, applied in both directions. It got the purpose of punitive damages right. Those damages were never meant to compensate Liebeck for her pain. The separate compensatory award already covered that. Punitive damages exist for one reason: to punish conduct a jury finds reckless, and to make repeating it more expensive than fixing it. A company that had logged more than 700 burn complaints across a single decade and still had not lowered its serving temperature, is close to a textbook example of exactly that kind of conduct. It got judicial oversight right too. The system did not simply let the jury's number stand. A judge reviewed it, agreed the underlying conduct was reckless, and still cut the total award by more than 80% before any settlement was ever reached. And it got one more thing right, something you can still taste today. In the years following the case, McDonald's adjusted its franchise coffee standards to hold coffee at a lower temperature than it did back in 1992. What this case actually got wrong was never the verdict. It was the story told about the verdict afterward. A story that swapped a severely burned 79-year-old woman for the caricature of a greedy plaintiff, because the caricature made a far better punchline than the truth ever could. So the next time somebody brings up the McDonald's coffee lady to prove that the legal system is broken, you will know something important. The case they are describing never actually existed. The one that did happen is still sitting in a courthouse file in New Mexico, and it tells a very different story.